Hi everyone, Pamela Haines here from Homes by Pam, empowered by Keller Williams Portfolio Realty in Toronto. And in Toronto today, it's a beautiful day. It's a spring day. It's about 12 degrees or so. Anyway, without further ado, today we're going to be discussing Form 100, which is the agreement of purchase and sale. So whether you're a new agent or you're a seasoned agent and just want a refresher, or maybe you're a new buyer or seller and you just want to know and understand what you're going to be signing, this is ultra important because it's probably the biggest transaction of your lifetime. So this episode is great for you. So stick around. This is what we're going to be discussing today, and we're going to start right now. Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Today we're going to be discussing Form 100. If you haven't already hit the subscription button, please do. And also hit the notification button so I can share some great information like this with you in the future. So Form 100 is an Ontario Real Estate Association form. It's a form for freehold properties. There are some slight variations for other type of properties. I don't know if you're like me, but I love simplicity. And I find that making things simple is so much better because people understand what they're signing. And it's really important as the agent for me to make sure my clients personally understand what they're signing before they sign on the dotted line. So without this document, the agreement of purchase and sale, there is no transaction. And this is actually a contract and it's signed under seal. So you're bound by this contract. And you're bound by contract law in Canada. And the realtor is the witness of the signing that's going to be taking place. And you're required to execute as per the contract. So that's a little bit of background. So if you don't execute, the contract and the execution of such will become null and void. Or you can be found liable and have to pay damages to the other party. Now I have to tell you, very few people actually have had these forms explained to them or clearly understand what these forms mean before they sign on the dotted line. And why wouldn't you want to know what these forms mean and what the clauses mean? Because this is probably the biggest transaction you're ever going to go through in your entire life. So as a buyer or a seller, at the very top, this is where your full legal names are put in place. And then the full property description, including the full legal description, the purchase price, and the deposit. The deposit is held by the listing brokerage's trust account. And it's never actually held by the seller. So the deposit is never released to the seller until the property actually closes. So number one is revocability. This is the period of time when the offer is good until. For example, if you're the buyer and you make an offer today at 12 noon and you make it good until 11:59 tonight, this is the period of time in which the seller has to respond until. And they can respond by accepting the offer that you provided, rejecting it, or countering it. Or they may decide to not even respond at all. And if they decide not to respond, then this contract is considered null and void. And the length of irrevocability can be dictated by different circumstances, like maybe personal circumstances or even the market conditions. Number two is completion date. This is also known as the closing date, or the date that the property gets registered in the buyer's name. And this may take a while to figure out between the two parties and can be a contentious point. But essentially this is the date that the buyer takes vacant possession of the property. And it should not be on a weekend or a holiday. Number three is notices. This just stipulates that the salesperson is working with the clients and representing the brokerage, and they have the authority to receive documents. And if they do receive documents, these are considered served. So essentially, it's understood that if the salesperson receives an email from a cooperating brokerage, that they should actually be translating or passing this information to their clients, that they're relaying this information. And multiple representation is covered here, where the agent could be representing both the buyer and the seller. And they must act in the best interest of each party. For example, if the buyer has to move, for instance, say they have a new job, or if the seller is going through a contentious divorce, the agent cannot actually disclose this personal information to either of the other party. So that's really important. So each party must be privy to the fact that this is a multiple representation relationship. And so essentially the salesperson must provide the necessary information for both the buyer and seller so that they can both make informed decisions as to whether to go ahead with the buying and selling of this real property. Number 4 is chattels included. These are personal movable items. So if you were to turn the house upside down, these are items that would fall out. So appliances that are not fixed, like the washer, dryer, fridge, stove, if it's not written, the seller can essentially take. Number 5, fixtures excluded. So these are fixed to the property. It can be even built-in items, and the seller would actually put these items that they want to keep. For instance, if they have an heirloom chandelier, they will put it here. Number 6 is rentals. So this could be a hot water tank, furnace, air conditioner, alarm system. If the seller has not listed the item here and as a rental and the buyer actually takes possession, the buying lawyer can actually make the seller accountable if they find out later that there was an item that they weren't aware of that as being a rental. Number 7 is HST. Usually this is included in resale properties. It's very rare that it's not, but it is not included in new builds. It's added on. Or the representative should be verifying this information. Number 8 is title search. This usually takes place 2 to 4 weeks before the closing, and your lawyer will find out everything and anything that's registered against the property. So essentially the buying and or selling lawyer will be in close communication. And if there are any problems, such as an old mortgage is registered against the title, then this will be known. Number 9 is future use. It's funny it's called future use because essentially the buyer is buying the property for present use. But it's important that if the buyer actually wants to buy the property and then change it, so for instance they want to open a hair salon, which is a commercial use business, then it's up to the buyer and it's on the buyer to find out if the zoning will permit this. 10 is title. This just ensures that the property is free of all major issues. So for instance, like a registered mortgage on title. The exception is utility easements, like hydro, phone, or water utility easements. The problem could be if there's a restrictive covenant. For instance, if a motor home is parked in the driveway of the seller's real property, and essentially if there is a restrictive covenant saying you can't park a motor home, and the property goes up for sale and the seller doesn't inform the buyer that this restrictive covenant exists, the transaction can actually be terminated as a result because it's sort of a misrepresentation that essentially this buyer was not informed and this is a restrictive covenant, that in fact the motorhomes cannot be parked in the driveway. That's an example of a restrictive covenant. Further, if the title search results in objections and the seller is unable to resolve a particular issue, then the agreement is void and the buyer's deposit will be returned. Number 11 is closing arrangements. So the buyer and the seller will actually retain a lawyer to complete the transaction. That's basically what this is saying. And the transaction will occur electronically, and this is obviously more and more what's happening now. The lawyer will be bound by the seller and by the buyer on how the property will close. And this is going to take place before the release of the keys and the money. Number 12, documents and discharge. What this is essentially saying is that if documents exist, say for instance a sketch or a survey of the land, then the seller will deliver this as soon as possible to the buyer. If, however, these don't exist, the seller is not obligated to get this. In terms of discharge, this just means that with the help of the lawyers, the discharge will take place. And in most cases, the seller will actually take the proceeds of the sale to actually discharge the mortgage. The lawyers will also make sure that the process moves smoothly and uneventfully. Number 13 is inspection. This just means that the buyer has the option to have the property inspected and also acknowledges the opportunity to do so. This is not the same as the condition, and the conditional upon inspection, must be included separately. Number 14 is insurance. This just means that the seller has to have insurance during the closing process until the buyer actually takes possession. And if there is substantial damage, the buyer can actually walk away or use the money from the seller's insurance claim to actually fix the damage. Number 15 is the Planning Act. You know, if someone's selling a piece of land, the agreement must comply with the Planning Act. For instance, if the person has to get the land severed, will be then conditional upon the approval of the severance. In this case, the buyer and the seller must put forth reasonable effort to have these obligations met. So this is part of the good faith provision. Number 16 is document preparation. This just means that the seller's lawyer prepares the deed, or it means that this covers circumstances where the sellers provide financing to the buyers on occasion. Number 17 is residency. This just means that the lawyer is doing their due diligence and checking that the seller is in fact a permanent Canadian resident. And if not, what can happen is capital gains taxes. And this is just put in place to protect the buyer against any money owed to the government. And this is pertaining to the Income Tax Act. And if this is addressed by the lawyer, the seller can actually be held liable if there's anything fishy about this. And in fact, the person is not a Canadian citizen and does not disclose this. Number 18 is adjustments. This is adjustments to the costs at closing. For instance, if the seller has paid tax for the entire year and the buyer actually takes possession on, say, September 1st, then the lawyer will actually calculate the amount that the buyers will actually credit to the sellers. And this will come from the sales proceeds. Number 19 is property assessment. This just means that taxes fluctuate and neither party will be held accountable for this. Number 20 is time limit. This is just stipulating that legal action will take place if one of the parties doesn't do their due diligence and, say for instance, the buyer is neglectful and is not abiding by the time on the contract and is not able to close when they're supposed to close. So the buyer can actually lose their deposit and also be sued for damages. Number 21, tender. This just means that each side is ready, able, and willing to complete the transaction. And the fact that there's no personal checks and funds transferred to satisfy this provision. Number 22 is Family Law Act. This pertains to the fact that there's spousal consent that needs to take place, especially in a matrimonial home. Even for a spouse that's not on title, they would have to sign. Number 23 is UFI. This just stipulates that to the best of the seller's knowledge, no urea formaldehyde has been used in the property. Number 24 is legal accounting and environmental advice. This just means that the parties are acknowledging that the information provided by the salesperson and brokerage are not held liable. This could include advice on tax or legal issues. Number 25 is consumer reports. This is just the fact that one's credit and or personal information might be referred to for the completion of the transaction. Number 26 is agreement in writing. This is just stipulating that any added conditions, for example, the schedule or anything written, will always supersede any pre-written clauses. Number 27, time and date. This just means that all the time and dates are based on where the actual real property is located. So for instance, in Toronto, property is located in Toronto, it's Eastern Standard Time. Number 28, successors and assigns. This is just stipulating that if in between firming up the deal and the closing process, if the buyer or seller dies in the process, then the person's estate has to ensure that the transaction takes place. So in summary, our job as a real estate agent is just to make sure that we're providing upfront information that's transparent, clear, simple, so that the buyer and or seller are able to navigate the process properly. Here is Schedule A. This is where the buyer puts their terms and conditions to protect themselves. So for instance, if they want to put a financing or home inspection condition here, or for a condo, if they want to put a condo status certificate review condition, this is where they would do so. This is anything to protect the buyer. If they want to put certain terms, like the buyer visits, they would be put here, or the fact that the property should be provided in broom swept condition, or the fact that this property has not been used as a marijuana grow op at any point. Anything to protect the buyer. So this is some information for you about the Form 100, the Agreement of Purchase and Sale. I hope you found this information helpful. If you did, give me a thumbs up and share with your friends, and make sure you grab the free offer in the description. So go ahead, everyone. Get outside. Get active. This is Pamela Haines from Homes by Pam, helping you with your real estate matters.